Hey College Success, this is your video for week 7 of the semester. So we are quickly approaching the halfway point of the semester. So this is for October 12th through October 18th. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to your week 7 folder. So week 7 starts chapter 3 of our textbook. So you can see we have 2 items in this week, 2 assignments that you'll be working on. But first I'm going to go through kind of the lecture for week 7, chapter 3. So I'm going to pull up your slides. So chapter 3 is all about building academic skills. I'm going to go right to our content here. So chapter 7 starts out with memory, and memory is one of the biggest pieces of our academic. Making sure that you have the abilities and skills for remembering and recalling and retrieving, and so knowing how to kind of implement some of those strategies can be really helpful. So how does memory work? Well, here is our textbook's model of memory. First, our textbook says we take in information through our environment. We encode it. So kind of flip back and forth here. We encode. We use our senses. We look to see what it is we need to take in, whether again we're seeing it, smelling it, tasting it, hearing it, feeling it. We're using the environment to encode information. Encoding also means like we're using our past experiences and our senses to help determine what is important, help determine what we need to remember. After we have our environment, we take in the information. It goes into our working memory. Sometimes people will call this like our short-term memory. It's where we're aware of what's going on. It's currently in our minds, but unless we actively work on it, it's not going to transfer to our long-term memory. It's going to be forgotten. So we have to practice ways to get information from our working memory to our long-term memory. And from there, we can remember everything, essentially. The problem is retrieval. If we don't practice retrieving information, it is going to be lost in our long-term memory without being able to pull it out. So again, encoding is using the environment, allowing us to determine what's important, using as many senses as possible. From there, it goes into that working memory, and we have to figure out, do we need to remember this? And if so, how are we going to get it from our working memory to our long-term memory? And so this comes in the concept of storage. So just like in an office setting, the easier and the more organized you store information, the easier it's going to be to retrieve. So if you organize something in alphabetical order versus just a random order, you're going to be able to find the information more easily if it's alphabetized. So that's the same concept with information. How do we store what we know? So there's a couple of strategies to do that. The first one is chunking information, breaking it into sections. For instance, right here, at first looking at that, it may not make a lot of sense. You might see it eventually here. But chunking, taking bits and pieces of information and pulling it out so that it makes sense. Another strategy is elaboration. So taking a concept and doing exactly what it says, elaborating, adding details, going into more depth with a particular concept. I always like to give little examples to myself, connect it to myself personally. Anything that's going to make a personal connection is going to be more meaningful. And then also mnemonics. So I know you've probably heard of Roy G. Biv. That's the red, orange, yellow. So it's the alphabet. It's the rainbow to allow you to know what colors come in order. Some other mnemonics in math, for instance, PEMDAS, that's a pretty well-known one. So taking maybe acronyms or taking words and having them stand for things to help you remember. So again, all that's doing is that's helping you store the information. If you're storing it in a way that makes sense because you have elaborated or you've created a little rhyme, then it's going to make this part a little bit easier for you. It's going to be able to have you retrieve it when needed. And we're going to talk about some of those strategies here in a few slides, like how can you retrieve? Because the more you practice retrieval, the easier it becomes as well. Part of chapter 3 also talks about active reading strategies. Remember, this is about academic skills. So there's lots of organizations that do research on reading, and the College Reading Learning Association is one of those that says up to 80 to 85% of what we learn in college is through what we read. And that's even more so true when you're taking an online course, because often you are reading information on your own because you're not sitting in a lecture class. So reading strategies are really important. So one of the things that's important with reading is to have some prior knowledge. The more prior knowledge you have on a topic, the easier it is for you to be able to learn and understand new information about that same topic. So what if you don't have prior knowledge? What if something's brand new? Well, you can take your textbook and preview it, look through the summaries, do a quick internet search or a video before reading to kind of start laying the foundation for prior knowledge. So that's going to help give you a good start. Now, there are a couple of reading methods, and I'm actually going to talk about the SQ3R because it builds on the 3R, but I just like the SQ3R method a little bit better. So this is kind of an overall process. Reading is a process. It's just like writing. You're not going to be expected to write something the first time and it be perfect. No, you're going to have to draft and edit and revise and rewrite and reread it. And same thing with reading. You're not going to read something the first time through and be 100% understand everything you've read every single time. So the SQ3R reading method is supposed to help you understand it a little bit better. So how this works is you basically start by previewing. Spend 30 seconds to a couple minutes looking at the text, see what sticks out to you, diagrams, bold-faced words, questions, headings, subheadings. Start coming up with some questions, based on what you see, or maybe it's the chapter questions. And then those can be kind of your goal as you read, to have those in mind, like, okay, I need to find the answer to these particular questions. Next, you want to read just a section at a time. Sometimes you might be having to read 10 to 15 pages or more. So maybe just a couple pages at first. Read a section, close your book, look and see, okay, did I understand these 2 or 3 pages? If not, I need to go back and reread now. Or, okay, I read my couple pages. Now I need to go back and take notes or highlight that section. It's always a nice idea to kind of summarize, either through writing or just out loud to yourself, what you've read. Because if you cannot summarize what you've read, you probably did not understand it. And then after you've read the entire sections, chapter or whatever it might be, review it. Go back and say, okay, did I find the answers to my questions? What do I still not know? So you can kind of fill in the gaps. So I mentioned highlighting a little bit. Highlighting is really effective, but if you do it improperly, it's almost as ineffective as just highlighting at all, not at all. So some general rules of thumb: you highlight while you're reviewing. You do not highlight while you read. Sometimes while we read, we think everything is important, so we highlight and then we look away and we see that darn near the whole page is highlighted. So you want to put that highlighter down, pen down, no note taking, no highlighting, no underlining while you read. Read and then go back and highlight or underline or annotate or whatever it might be, because then you have some perspective about what actually is important. And you want to make sure you only highlight or underline around 25% of your page. Any more than that, and then it starts to get a little bit too messy. Okay, so some note-taking strategies. First of all, note-taking doesn't just happen in the classroom. There's some things you should do before you get to the class to take notes. You should know what chapter is going to be covered. If possible, read that chapter ahead of time, so you're studying that prior knowledge. And then when you're in the classroom, if you've read the chapter already, you may not feel like you have to write every single thing down because you've already done the work. Take notes, whatever method works best for you. And we're going to talk about the methods here in a minute. And then just make sure you're engaging, asking questions, making eye contact. All of that is part of the note-taking process. And the reason we take notes is because often if we don't write down what we are hearing or learning and we don't review it, we're going to forget it. So here are some note-taking strategies. Some people really do like to take notes through their computer or through an app. If that is more your modality, I would encourage you to look at some apps and see what would work best for you. The research in our textbook does say that linear notes are the least effective when you just literally write in sentences or paragraphs, because there's no real structure or style, and sometimes it becomes a little overwhelming. So instead, maybe using an outline, almost like you would when you're writing a paper, or Cornell method. This one is really effective for organizing. You make one column over here for questions, concepts, terms, and then over here you go into more depth. You answer the question, you define the word. That really helps set up kind of like a study guide for you also. If you're a visual person, some maps or matrix could also be helpful, and these are usually really effective again for those visual people. So some general tips, and these usually apply more if you're in a face-to-face class. If your instructor is spending a lot of time on the topic, their voice kind of raises and goes a little bit more quickly. They repeat information or they put stuff on the board. Those are all tips that you should be jotting that information down. Okay, so then our chapter goes into study strategies, again, because this is all about building academic skills. We are all multisensory learners, meaning that if you can use as many senses to encode or take in information, it's going to be to your benefit. But there's this concept called picture superiority effect, where if we can create an image to go with concepts, images are often more stronger than words alone. So if you can have an image with words, it's going to help you remember that concept or that term or whatever it is that you're studying. Remember a few slides ago we talked about retrieval. Well, you want to practice retrieving. So when you practice retrieving, you are trying to pull out information that you have stored, which goes back to making sure that you've stored it in a way that makes sense first. So when you test your knowledge, it's one of the most powerful ways to learn, because we need to make sure that we practice getting the knowledge out of our long-term memory. So how can you do that? Well, create practice tests, or maybe someone's already created them. You take the practice tests. Use flashcards. After every class, do a quick summary of what you learned. Talk with a classmate. Go over it. So you want to make sure that you are constantly practice retrieving that information. And then one of the best ways to make sure you know the information is to teach it to someone else. If you can teach the information to someone else, you know that you've understood it. If you're not able to communicate it, then you probably have some reviewing to do. All right, and then it starts to kind of go into some study group tips, because learning with others is proven to be successful because you get different perspectives. And sometimes a teacher can explain something 5 different ways, but it won't make sense until a peer describes it. So here are just some tips on how to make an effective study session. Making sure that you have ground rules. Maybe everyone has a particular role they fill, and then make sure that you're all on task. The last little bit talks about how important it is to organize not only like your notes, but also just your information in ways that make sense to you, make it meaningful, create examples, connect what you're learning to what you already know, and make sure you have a study plan, which also means make sure you allow time to study. Use as many senses as you can, organize the information, review it, test, and teach. So that is just a overview of chapter 3. Again, whenever I do that, I still hope that you spend more time in the chapter yourself, especially on maybe particular components of the chapter that you need to hone in on a little bit more. So let's talk about your 2 assignments for this week. So I'm going to scroll down and go into the assignment folder. And you'll see you have 2 assignments, the test your memory and the student reflection. The test your memory, you'll see, is split into 2 parts. The first part is this right here. You click into this, and it's going to open up, and it's going to have like a little memory exercise. Now, I have had my students in my other class say that Chrome was kind of giving them problems. If that's the case, always feel free to like switch your browser, maybe try Firefox. Clear your browser, clear your history, that kind of stuff. Also, that might help you. So you'll take this little memory assessment, and I don't see those results. How you get your points for this assignment is right here. You've taken your assignment, you've taken your little survey. Now you go in here, and it asks you 3 questions. How many words were you able to remember? Because what it's going to do is give you like a slide of words, and you're going to have to like memorize them, and then it'll disappear, and that's going to ask you to like click and say, okay, which words were in this original list? So how many were you able to remember? Which words did you forget? And what memory technique did you use? Like when the slide was up, were you just repeating? Were you making connections? And you can just click right in here, write submission. Oh, I did. And answer your questions right here. Okay, and then hit submit. So that's what you're doing for the test your memory. You take the little assessment and then answer those 3 questions, because again, I won't see your results here. You need to respond to those 3 questions there. All right, and the second and last thing you're doing for this week is your college resource reflection, student life and recreation. So I know things look a little different on campus this semester because of COVID, but we still have a lot of opportunities to get involved. So I'm going to ask that you click on this link here, and it's going to take you to our student organization page. And the prompt for this week is look at all the organizations and clubs we offer. Find 1, 2, or 3 that you think you might be interested in potentially joining. You're not actually joining. You do not have to join, just that look interesting to you. And if you eventually one day join them, awesome. So look those that would be interesting to you. And in your reflection, talk about why you could benefit from joining those organizations or getting involved on campus in general. So again, here is the list, and maybe it's surprising to see how much we have. Whole list. You'll see some of them are related to majors and some of them are just for recreation. So kind of scroll through and then you can click on one and it'll open up and it'll give you a little bit of information, including who the advisor is and how to contact that person. And you can always see too, if you really are interested in joining, you can always contact the advisor and ask them if they are meeting maybe virtually somehow this semester or when they plan to start meeting again. So again, spend some time clicking around. We have a lot to offer here in terms of student life and organizations. We also have a student government here on campus. So again, some of this is kind of on pause with COVID, but I still, for your reflection, want you to look to see which ones interest you, whether it's personally or professionally, or maybe a little bit of both, and talk about those organizations and why you would benefit from joining them and how getting involved on campus is to your benefit as well. All right, so real quick recap. Week 7 from October 12th through 18th. So both of these assignments are due by Sunday the 18th for week 7 attendance. Only completing one will get you half attendance points. And then also spend a little bit more time in chapter 3 because as you know then, week 8 we'll have chapter 3 continued and you'll see your chapter 3 quiz and those other materials there. All right, hope everyone has a great week. Bye.